In a tight-knit family structure, an older sibling named Michael was the absolute center of gravity around which every single relative continuously orbited. Michael was not a dominant, overt tyrant. Instead, his life was a continuous, catastrophic sequence of sudden emergencies, deep financial disasters, and intense emotional meltdowns. Every few months, like clockwork, Michael would experience a fresh crisis that required his family to drop everything, pack up their computer workspaces, and rush to his absolute rescue. If anyone attempted to establish a healthy personal boundary or question his chaotic patterns, Michael would instantly spiral into intense rage or deep despair, suggesting that they were cruel, heartless, and abandoning him in his darkest hour. Over a 10-year period, his siblings spent their entire adult lives walking on eggshells, sacrificing their own financial stability and peace of mind simply to manage Michael's emotional volatility. This real-world case study exposed a chilling psychological trap. It proved that a person does not need physical strength or institutional power to control an entire group. Instead, they can use their own perceived fragility, chaotic distress, and emotional instability to hold a room hostage, completely blinding the environment to a highly sophisticated system of absolute psychological dominance. This profound relationship hijack is driven by a psychological mechanism known as emotional ransom, operating through a structure called helpless dominance. Unlike the antisocial predator who uses cold charm to manipulate, this archetype relies on absolute emotional volatility and chronic distress to override your logical prefrontal cortex. Their ego cannot tolerate the internal reality of their own core identity emptiness and intense fear of abandonment. To protect themselves from this deep anxiety, their subconscious executes an automated survival shift. It transforms their helplessness into a literal weapon of mass compliance. They don't demand your respect. They demand your continuous emergency intervention. They treat your independent peace, your personal boundaries, and your career focus as a direct personal attack on their survival. They use their volatile distress as a psychological shield, transforming your natural desire for self-protection into an act of literal betrayal in the eyes of the crowd, ensuring they remain the absolute center of attention inside the family or workplace environment. To see why this emotional ransom holds such an ironclad, paralyzing lock over your consciousness, we must look at the neurobiology of hyper-reactivity and the mirror neuron alarm networks. When modern neuroscientists place individuals who suffer from extreme emotional dysregulation inside functional brain scanners and expose them to minor social conflicts, they observe an extraordinary neural explosion. While a normal brain utilizes its cognitive control networks to slowly process a disagreement, these individuals experience an immediate, hyper-intense activation inside the amygdala, accompanied by a near-total failure of the prefrontal cortex to regulate the emotional surge. In a very literal sense, their biology drops its internal brakes. They do not merely experience an emotion, their nervous system undergoes an absolute catastrophe. When you witness this chaotic distress, your own mirror neurons instantly fire, replicating their panic inside your body. Your amygdala takes the low-road threat pathway, flooding your system with cortisol and adrenaline, taking your logic completely. When this intense neurochemical anxiety takes hold during their crisis phase, the victim's subconscious mind deploys an automated defensive maneuver known as the caretaker normalisation fallacy. This is a psychological shield where an ordinary, empathetic individual observes blatant signs of emotional blackmail, fabricated emergencies, and toxic entitlement, but chooses to treat them as innocent symptoms of a deeply misunderstood soul. The human ego cannot handle the destabilizing reality of recognizing that a loved one's pain is actually a calculated tool of absolute control. To protect your pride from the terrifying realization that you are being emotionally bankrupted, your mind performs a catastrophic rationalization. It tells a story. If only I can help them fix this one final crisis. If only I offer enough patience and financial support, they will finally find stability and let me rest. Notice how the mind weaponizes your own capacity for empathy to keep you completely blind to an active ransom loop. This process happens entirely beneath your conscious awareness, leaving your defenses totally lowered. The primary weapon an emotional captor uses to execute their systemic control is a process called intermittent crisis manufacturing. During his 10-year campaign, Michael did not maintain a flat line of chaos. He utilized the calm periods of his life to let the family's defenses naturally lower. The exact second his relatives began focusing on their own lives, his subconscious would register an immediate threat of abandonment, triggering an automated manufacturing script. He would suddenly lose his job, experience a medical scare, or collapse into a deep emotional crisis. This timing is calculated with absolute precision to disrupt your personal autonomy. The clash between your expectation of a peaceful timeline and the reality of their sudden explosion creates severe cognitive dissonance inside your brain. Your predictive processing engine is an absolute pattern-seeking machine that demands consistency to close a mental loop. By throwing a grenade of fresh chaos into your environment, they force your system into a frantic rescue response, choosing the exhaustion of an immediate emergency intervention today over the risk of facing their toxic rage tomorrow. Alongside crisis manufacturing, the volatile manipulator utilizes a secondary, highly passive filter known as obligatory emotional inversion. The moment a target realizes they're being bled dry and attempts to confront the manipulator with clean data or clear financial boundaries, the captor's subconscious instantly executes a complete reversal of the moral hierarchy. Michael did not address the financial data. He collapsed into absolute despair, suggesting that the boundary was a literal act of cruelty that would drive him to self-destruction. This filter alters the perception of the entire room because it weaponizes the crowd's baseline survival morals. The selective attention filter of the environment ensures that the crowd highlights the manipulator's performative fragility, while completely deleting the hard data points of their chronic entitlement and past exploitation. Obligatory inversion transforms the social group into a blank space, where the true victim is publicly branded as a cold, abusive monster, allowing the predator to maintain absolute dominance under the guise of an absolute victim. These abstract biological filters manifest daily in devastating real-world loops, the most common of which is the trap of the codependent echo chamber. This is the precise reason why an entire family network or office department can participate in the continuous enabling of a toxic individual without a single person speaking up. When a volatile manipulator successfully deploys obligatory emotional inversion, they create an absolute optical illusion of a fragile soul on the brink of collapse. The crowd looks at their performative pain and concludes that any boundary is an act of violence. To avoid the intense anxiety of standing alone against the group's moral consensus, every relative chooses to enforce the compliance. They approach the independent family member and whisper, "Just let it go. Don't rock the boat. You know how Michael gets. It's easier to just pay the bill." The family voluntarily surrenders its collective intelligence, sliding down a slope of systemic enabling simply because its members choose to deny the plain truth of their eyes to conform to a frozen. We see this exact same self-sabotage playing out through the pattern of the double-bind gridlock. When an empathetic individual attempts to escape an emotional ransom loop, the predator's predictive engine constructs a flawless double-bind trap, where every single choice results in intense guilt and social condemnation. If you respond to their crisis and save them, you sacrifice your own financial security, your time, and your computer workspace, keeping yourself trapped in their orbit. But if you hold your boundary, block their notifications, and refuse to intervene, the manipulator ensures that the subsequent fallout is blamed entirely on your absence. They ensure that the flying monkeys of the social circle look at your silence and brand you as an unfeeling, selfish monster. This constant mapping creates a profoundly hollow personal life. Your brain registers this targeted social exclusion as an immediate survival threat to your position in the herd. To secure your safety, your subconscious forces you to return to the rescue track, sacrificing your personal sovereignty today, just to secure a temporary drop of relief from the agony of manufactured guilt tomorrow. When this collective blindness and helpless dominance scales up from an isolated family structure to a societal level, it produces the highly destructive phenomenon of therapeutic tyranny and institutional infantilization. A civilization enters a profound crisis of decay when its primary institutions stop evaluating laws, cultural trends, and civic policies based on objective human consequence, data, or logic. Instead, they begin evaluating them solely based on who can display the highest level of emotional dysregulation, historical trauma, and fragile offense. Independent critical thought is treated as a literal act of social violence against the weak. Mass conformity turns a population into a synchronized, unthinking herd that will gladly burn down its own structural legal protections simply to shield the collective ego from the terrifying vulnerability of objective truth. A society does not slide into madness because it is overrun by external monsters. It slides into tyranny because ordinary citizens choose to view emotional volatility as absolute moral authority, violently suppressing any calm, independent voice who tries. The true danger of interacting with a volatile emotional captor is that it constructs a perfectly closed, self-fulfilling cognitive loop that entirely blinds you to your own loss of personal sovereignty. The cycle begins the moment you break under the pressure of their manufactured crisis and offer a forced, unearned rescue intervention, simply to end the agonizing wave of internal guilt. This high-stress environment creates immediate subconscious pressure to preserve their fragile identity, forcing your brain to reduce activity in its logical and self-protective networks. Because your internal boundaries are lowered by the chemical relief of the rescue, you choose compliance, overextending your energy to keep their fleeting calm. To clear the immediate wave of exhaustion, your mind instantly deploys caretaker normalisation, rewriting history to convince your conscious ego that they are simply a wounded soul who needs extra patience. This failure to stand for your own independent dignity is then used by your predictive engine as a new acceptable baseline for the future, permanently locking you in a loop of trauma dependence. Dismantling this matrix of emotional blackmail requires a rare, aggressive practice known as the somatic firewall. You cannot melt an emotional ransom loop by offering more patience, more explanations, or more sacrifice. Your brain's predictive processing engine demands hard, unyielding data points of absolute emotional detachment to break the spell of their inversion. This reprogramming begins by learning an extraordinary truth uncovered in clinical psychology. You are not responsible for regulating the nervous system of an adult manipulator. The next time a toxic presence triggers your anxiety by launching a manufactured crisis or screaming that you are abandoning them, do not look to their distress for feedback. Recognize that your intense wave of internal guilt is your amygdala firing an early exclusion alarm under the pressure of their tears. Force your physical body to execute an absolute stop. Refuse to negotiate, refuse to argue, and refuse to offer an emergency rescue. Anchor your awareness strictly to your own boundaries, matching their volatility with an absolute icy wall of permanent neutrality. By choosing to hold your ground, you break the loop of interaction completely. Stepping out of the shadow of an emotional captor and choosing your own personal sovereignty is an act of supreme psychological heroism, because it forces you to face the raw neural pain of group condemnation, intense internal guilt, and absolute public visibility. Your brain will fight this process at every single turn, desperately screaming at you to check the screen, solve the crisis, and accept the comfortable shared illusions of the loop, simply to keep your ego safe from the agony of closing the door forever. But now that you know the anatomy of the trap, now that you understand how your subconscious mind uses devaluation conditioning, proximity starvation, and introjected guilt to turn you into an unthinking echo, the silence has lost its lock over your consciousness. You can choose to step out of the illusion and view your connection with absolute, unyielding clarity. This navigation of your subconscious architecture is a lifelong education, and your brain utilizes dozens of other invisible neural mechanisms every single day to dictate your choices and trap you on autopilot without your consent. If you are ready to shatter the rest of these hidden mental loops, discover how your mind fakes reality, and unlock the true mechanisms of your subconscious, click on the playlist appearing on your screen right now. We have built an entire archive of long-form case studies and psychological deep dives designed explicitly to help you look past the self-delusions of your ego. Click through, explore the library, and take absolute control of your psychology.